Good afternoon and welcome to Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the 10th Annual Mates David and Stahl Memorial Lecture in Bioethics. On behalf of the medical school, I would like to thank Dr. Ted Stahl for his vision and his commitment to the issues of bioethics. This important lecture encourages thought-provoking and meaningful dialogue among our students, faculty, staff, and the community. In addition to Ted and his family, I would like to thank the committee, along with the individuals and organizations who have donated so generously to make this program happen. Through your ongoing efforts, we are building a firm foundation of endowed lectureships, fellowships, and professorships for our medical school as it continues to grow and advance into the nation's top tiers of publicly funded medical schools and medical schools in general. As I near, believe it or not, the one-year anniversary of my time as interim dean of this medical school, I've really enjoyed many events throughout this academic calendar. Just 2 weeks ago, I presided over the match day when our graduating medical students found out where they were going for their residencies, and I'm very proud to tell you all that we had a 98% match rate, topping the national rate by 4%. On that same day, one of the fourth-year students who was matching published the lead article in the New England Journal of Medicine on myocardial infarctions versus weekends versus during the week. Today, we continue in that trend by hosting two internationally recognized bioethicists who will address one of the most pressing issues of our time, the ethics of genetic enhancement. I'm especially pleased to welcome Dr. Dan Brock, professor of medical ethics at Harvard Medical School, and Dr. Lee Silver, professor of molecular biology and public affairs at Princeton University. Now, before introducing our speakers, I'm delighted to turn the program over to Dr. Ted Stahl, whose vision, perseverance, and support have made this lecture possible. Ted?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. Speakers already have had a session with medical students earlier this afternoon, and I can tell you from being there it was a very exciting one. My role is to remind people about my parents and why this lectureship was set up, memorializing them. And I should say that I really can't believe that this is the 10th of this series of lectures in bioethics, which was given in memory of my parents, whose picture you will see on the side, and has become more than what I'd hoped for when I first approached Dean Paz to discuss this lectureship. In this instance, as in most of what I do, the idea came to have a lectureship for an audience of academics and of those from the community. The reasons were worked out afterward. This lectureship presents lectures into both town and gown as an interface in the ongoing dialogue between these two communities. As Rabbi Hilsenrath said to me recently, where else would I have access to lectures such as these? These lectures discuss the ethical issues arising from the recent dramatic and historical changes in medicine. Why this lectureship and why this venue? My parents, whose history in part you may read in your programs, lived their lives in a time of terrible historic changes while attempting to maintain continuity and pass on the lessons of social justice taught in our Jewish heritage. Despite their exposure to the extremes of social injustice, my parents nevertheless taught me the importance of caring for other people and for fighting for social justice for all. Some time ago, I told the story of a young man named Gus from our neighborhood in Bayonne who had moved south in the years much before the civil rights movement. He must have been about 14 years old at the time when he returned for a visit, having adopted Southern white attitudes. He expressed these attitudes at lunch in our house one day. Over the years, Gus may have forgotten, but I certainly have not forgotten my mother's outrage at his expression of racism. It is vivid in my memory to this day. And those of you who knew my mother will be able to picture her reaction. I remember Gus's stunned expression. My mother was attacked by German brown shirts and severely injured, requiring hospitalization. And I didn't know the details of that until many years later. My bar mitzvah prophet was Amos, and my father taught me the meaning of his prophecy espousing social justice. I've told these stories before, but I thought they were worth repeating. My parents lived their Jewish heritage and lived in the commercial, secular world of Germany and later in America. All this contributed to the decision to establish this lectureship in this medical school. Now, ethics is an attempt how we should behave toward one another with justice, how we should deal fairly with each other, singly and in community. Bioethics, or medical ethics, deals with issues of how we can continue to maintain our ethical values in the context of the rapid and extraordinary changes in medicine which we have all experienced. In the past, distinguished lecturers have dealt with a variety of issues. Today, our speakers will be discussing genes, the agents of our biologic memory and continuity. Our speakers will be debating the question of whether it is good to fool with Mother Nature. And now I call on Professor McIntyre.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stahl. And as chairman of the Stahl Lecture Committee, it's my pleasure to also welcome you here this afternoon, and also to extend an invitation to all of you to join us for refreshments when the session is concluded this afternoon. My role on the program is very limited, but pleasureful, and actually it is to introduce Professor Jeff McMahon, who will introduce our speakers and also moderate the program this afternoon. Jeff is visiting research collaborator at the Center for Human Values in Princeton and holds his primary academic appointment as professor of philosophy at Rutgers. I must say that the committee is indebted to Dr. McMahon this afternoon because as a member of our committee, he actually suggested this program. He went ahead and made contact with our speakers, and he followed up on all of the details and will introduce our speakers and moderate the program this afternoon. So it's my pleasure now to turn the podium over to Dr. Jeff McMahon. Jeff?
Well, I don't think I really deserve that introduction, but who was introducing Russ? I don't know. But it is true that I was instrumental in the selection of today's speakers, so if you have any complaints, you have to address them to me. But I don't think you'll have any complaints. We've had one very successful session so far, and I'm sure this session will be at least equally good. Let me tell you a little something about the speakers, and then I'm sure you're actually ready to hear the talks after all the many introductions. There's, on the program, Dan Brock is listed as coming first. The actual order of the speakers is going to be reversed. And Lee Silver will be speaking to us first. Lee is a very distinguished professor of molecular biology at Princeton, who also has an appointment in the Woodrow Wilson School for Public Affairs there. He's one of a small number of practicing scientists who have made an effort to bring the fruits of science into public discussion in an informed and intelligent way. I know Richard Dawkins has a chair in Oxford that's something like the professor of the communication of science to the public or something like that. Princeton doesn't have such a chair, but if they did, Lee would have it. He wrote a seminal and important book about 10 years ago called Remaking Eden, which was about genetics and cloning and its implications for reproductive life. And he has a more recent book, which I would urge you all to go out and buy, called Challenging Nature. And our second speaker is Dan Brock, who is currently director of all things ethical at the Harvard Medical School. You can read the details in the brochure. There's so much there I can't repeat it all. Dan is a philosopher by training and was for many years in the philosophy department at Brown University. He was departmental chair there for a while and ran a kind of bioethics institute there for a while as well. After leaving Brown, he went to NIH for a couple of years, had to leave because he was too much for them to to handle, and they were trying to censor him, as we were hearing before we came here, and he went on from there to Harvard. He is co-author of a very important book called From Chance to Choice, Genetics and Justice is the subtitle. It is the leading philosophical work on ethics and the new genetics. It's written with 3 other co-authors, Alan Buchanan, Dan Wickler, and Norman Daniels. They are, in my view, the best people in bioethics and medical ethics. I always think of that book as being written by the Fab Four of bioethics. Those of you from the Beatles era will get my reference there. So we have very distinguished speakers, and thank you very much for coming. I see there's not even room for everyone in here. I'm delighted to see that our speakers have attracted so many people. Thank you for coming, and we'll start with Lee Silver.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have made my way up Route 27 from Princeton, only 35 minutes away. And it's a real delight to be here. I'm really pleased that Jeff was able to arrange for me and Dan to come. And it's wonderful that Ted Stahl has given us the opportunity to speak today, as he's given other bioethicists the opportunity. I should make a disclaimer at the outset: I am not a bioethicist. I've never been trained in bioethics. And what I like to do most is to raise questions without giving any answers. My students hate it, but that's what I'll do for you, is basically to provide some of the scientific background to what is a human being, where did human beings come from, and where might we go in the future, of course, which is total speculation. And I'll leave it to Dan to tell us what the ethical thing is to do or not do. So I'll start off right away. And what does it mean to be human is the first question that we want to. I'm making noises, aren't I? I'm actually going to stand here, so I want to. Oh. Okay, technology's been fixed. All right. What does it mean to be human is the first question that we have to ask before we talk about remaking human nature. And I have here a picture on the bottom, a picture of my son and a chimpanzee who is the genetically nearest relative to the human species. And we now know, since Charles Darwin, that human beings as a species evolved from a non-human primate that lived about 5 million years ago. And that non-human primate is the common ancestor of both human beings and the chimpanzee today. It looked pretty much like a chimpanzee. And what happened over the last 5 million years is that DNA sequences, particular genes, changed along the line leading to each of these species, but particularly to human beings, and gave us a particular unique appearance and mind. And to my mind, it is these two features that define us as human beings. We differ from chimpanzee in a lot of other ways, physiologically and metabolically and those kinds of things, but those are not really that important. What it is that makes us human are these two aspects of our being. And it turns out if you look at the DNA sequence of chimps and humans, the remarkable thing is how similar they are to each other. This is a particular gene that I used to work with in my laboratory. It's a digital code that you can see all these purple letters. The yellow letters represent the difference between human and chimp. So there's an occasional difference, as you can see, that occurs. All these differences have added up over the last 5 million years. These particular differences don't do anything at all, but somewhere in the genome, there are specific DNA changes that have accumulated that give rise to the difference between human beings and chimpanzees. Now, I should make the point very clearly that the most shocking thing that Charles Darwin did was not just to suggest that we evolved from non-human primates. But he also, as a consequence of his view of evolution, our view of evolution today, he also made it clear that there never was a first human being, that during the evolution of a non-human primate to human beings, all along the way, all through those 200,000 generations, no child looked very different from its mother and father. And yet at the end, you have human beings. At the beginning, you have chimpanzees. And you go through this fuzzy stage where it's not clear whether you call somebody a human being or not. Science is not going to be able to answer that question. And the process by which it occurred is all these mutations that have been adding up slowly over the years. Now, if you look at the fossil record, here you can see that over the last 3 million years, if we look at our ancestors, each one of those little black dots there represents a particular fossil that's been uncovered and shows you the skull size. And the assumption is the brain fills the skull. So you can see what's happened over the last 3 million years is that skull size has increased. This is a proxy for intelligence, one thinks, and this is where we are today with very, very much larger brains than existed. Now, this is the past evolution of humankind, okay? And what happened in the past, over 3 million years, is all these other species, our ancestral species, went extinct. So we have evolved out of species that went extinct, possibly in many cases because we killed them off. But none of those species exist. We exist today at this point in time. And the first question that I'd like to ask, and I want to make it clear, I'm going to speculate about the future. I was trained as a physicist, and physicists always speculate about things like, is there life on other planets, and what happens if you fall into a black hole? Not a very ethical thing to do. So I'm going to speculate and say, what does the future hold based on what we understand about science? And I'll tell you that there are 4 categories of different human futures. I'm going to illustrate them on this slide here. One possibility is what population and evolutionary biologists call extinction without issue. This is what has happened to almost every species that's ever existed. It went extinct. It had no descendants, okay? The species that I'm showing you on the slide, or things close to them, went extinct, but out of the species came new species, and eventually humankind. So one possibility is that at some point in the future, and make sure you look at the timeline, I don't know when this is going to happen, maybe 1 million years, 2, 3, who knows, 100,000 years, it's possible that there will be no human descendants, period. So that's if we follow what happens to most other species. Second possibility is that nothing changes, okay? And so we go on for the next 2 or 3 billion years, and that's when the Earth, that's when the sun burns out, it expands and engulfs the Earth in this ball of fire, and everything dies. But until then, it might be possible, as a second category, that human beings won't change. There's 6 billion people on Earth today. If you're an optimist and you think that all societies are going to be industrialized and peace will enwrap the world, then there's no reason, and that's it. Then there won't be a change in the human species. Third possibility is that enhancement will occur with continuity. Now, don't ask me exactly what I mean by enhancement, because I don't know exactly what I mean by enhancement. Just to say that Homo erectus had no clue what it would be like to have a Homo sapien mind. And we have no clue what it might mean, or whether it's even possible to have a human level of intelligence and awareness that is beyond Homo sapien. We can't understand what it is, but we do know that if you look at the DNA level, there's no end. There's nothing that says this is the end point of DNA evolution. So it's possible there might be enhancement, and enhancement of continuity basically says the human species will continue to exist, but there'll be this great diversity of human beings in the future, far, far greater diversity than exists today. The fourth possibility is species replacement. Just like has happened in our recent past, the Homo sapiens as a species will go extinct, but we will have descendants who are post-human. And again, as I said, I don't know what this means, whether it's possible there'll be one post-human species, 2, 3, multiple post-human species, but it's species replacement. This is what many people have written about, like Francis Fukuyama talks about the post-human future, and this is a possibility. Now, the question is, how can that happen? How can the human species evolve over the future? And the potential drivers of positive evolution, we can, again, lay them out in categories. The driver of evolution in the past has been natural selection, and for those of you who know some biology, I'm including sexual selection within natural selection. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. Natural selection is based on reproductive advantages. It means that individuals of a species that have a particular gene which allows them to have more offspring than those individuals who don't have that gene, those individuals will have more offspring, and that gene will overtake the population. That's the way evolution has occurred in the past through natural selection. I think that natural selection, and I hope is natural selection, is unlikely in the future. If you're an optimist and you think that society will engulf the whole world, will have a human population, natural selection is eliminated by medicine, human rights, and equality for women, because it requires that people with a particular gene will have more offspring than those who don't have a gene. And most of the people in this room, I'm quite sure, do not live up to their reproductive potential. If anything, we always go against Darwinian instincts. We don't have as many children as we can have. Medicine goes against natural selection. Human rights goes against natural selection, because you can't kill somebody who doesn't have your gene if you have universal human rights. So that's the first possible driver of evolution. The second is selection with breeding. This is something that human beings have been practicing for 10,000 years. I've given you an example there of a weed that grows in a single valley of Mexico. It's inedible. And 10,000 years ago, the ancestors of the people living there 10,000 years ago took this and turned it into corn or maize, what would you want to call it. So this is selection through breeding. They completely modified an organism to have properties that its ancestor did not have. This would require selection through breeding. Means that some people control other people, requires slavery, forced mating, and infanticide over thousands of years, and it still probably wouldn't work. And there's no purpose served by it. We can talk more about what I mean by that later on. I hope and don't think this will happen, although it's a possibility. The third possibility is targeted genomic enhancement, which is really the subject of today's talk. And genomic enhancement means, and this is the way I'm talking about it because this is the way that I think most likely it could occur, is the idea that prospective parents are going to change the DNA of the embryo that's going to become their child, and that they're going to raise this child. I'm not talking about governments raising zombies. I'm talking about parents who might want to give their children genetic enhancements. Now, the first, when people have been talking about this, I guess since the 1950s, when DNA was first discovered to be a double helix and the basis for heredity, scientists very often, when something controversial like this comes up, the first response is, it can't happen, it's impossible. In 1970, there was a very famous molecular biologist, Nobel Prize winner named Jacques Monod, who wrote a book called Chance and Necessity, wonderful book. And he made it clear what he thought about this possibility. And he said, so this is the grandfather of molecular biology, and he said, modern molecular genetics offers us no means whatsoever for acting upon the ancestral heritage. And he's basically saying DNA is too small to manipulate, and maybe forever. In other words, maybe impossible, not just improbable, but forever. Forever changed within 10 years. By 1980, the impossible was accomplished with animals when the first mice were engineered. This is not this particular embryo. Mice were engineered with human beta globin genes, and genetic engineering has become much, much more sophisticated in the following 26 years. So it's no longer impossible. I mean, if you can do it on mice, it could be done on humans. So the second reason to be against it is to say, well, it's possible, but it can't be done safely or efficiently. This was and so bioethical debate is an utter waste of time. This is what Maxine Singer, who's a molecular biologist, said to a group of bioethicists in 1985. Now, she's a brilliant molecular biologist, but what her fault was is that just like so many other scientists, she assumed technology would always be the same as it is now. Most of us make that assumption because we can't think of future technologies that haven't been invented. And so we assume, oh, well, the technology is going to always be the way it is now. The way it is now is not safe and not efficient, and therefore we can't do it. But technologies have a way of advancing and exploding and becoming new things that nobody had thought about. And in fact, by 1990, there had been new methods of doing genetic engineering, much more sophisticated, much more efficient. And this is just a real quickie. This is a scientific review by scientists in JAMA of the movie, Michael Crichton's movie Jurassic Park, which I'm sure many of you saw. And this scientist was very upset because it gave people the wrong impression and didn't want people to think that science could do this. And he said it's ridiculous. We can only sequence 3.5% of the genome of one individual per year. It would cost $30 million. No one has succeeded in cloning a living animal. And all of this was in 1982. 26 years later, it's all gone. It's just all the technical limitations have been eliminated. We can sequence genomes, left and right within a brief period of time for far, far less than $30 million. We could even sequence the Neanderthal genome is being sequenced. And as you all know, cloning has happened. So scientists just tend to be very conservative about new technologies becoming available, including myself. This is what I wrote in 1996. I wrote, and this is in my book, Remaking Eden, where I wrote about all sorts of possibilities, and I said it seems likely that the goal I'm talking about is the sequencing of the human genome, will be achieved by the year 2020. Well, it was achieved in 2003. So, even I, who've been accused of hype, was underestimating it. I don't want to go through all of this. These are all technologies that were invented that completely turned upside down the field. Every one of these technologies turned the field of molecular biology upside down, allowed scientists to do things that were impossible just so-called impossible just 10 years ago. I don't want to go into these details. It doesn't matter. Technology is very powerful. On the left, you can see a mouse brain on the far left where the cerebral cortex has been enhanced so that it's twice as big as a normal mouse. On the right, mice have been, I don't know whether you would call this an enhancement or not, they've been turned from promiscuous into monogamous through the change of a gene that affects the way they think. And to give you an idea of where technology is, on the left, this is a mouse with a human chromosome. And then, of course, I don't want to get into this. Well, how many human chromosomes do you need before it's a human? Who knows? And on the right is an example of what's going on in animals. Again, to show you how powerful this technology is. This is in Nature Biotechnology, and the idea is that at some point it's going to be possible to breed cows that make human blood. And what they mean by that is all the proteins that are in the blood are human proteins in place of the cow proteins, and then you could use it for transfusion. So all of these things, if you had said these things in 1970 to somebody, you said it to me in 1970, I would have said, that's ridiculous. It's impossible. It won't be possible. If at all, it'll take thousands of years. So the last objection to genetic engineering of humans is that Bridget Hogan expressed this. She's a scientist, and she said, it's unlikely to be 100% reliable. And that's what you have to insist on. If it's not 100% reliable, then you shouldn't allow it for reproduction. But what Bridget wasn't thinking about, and she's an embryologist,